War. If there is a single defining truth of the dark and terrible age in which we live, it is war. Red and bloody. The ceaseless battle between mankind and the alien, between the divine truth of the God Emperor and the falsehoods of chaos, between brother and brother, between light and dark, life and death. War is all. This treatise concerns but one war among many, but a war whose nature and secrets render it quite exceptional. It was a conflict that rose up to plunge a score of star systems into savage strife, a war which turned entire armies of the Imperium's most powerful warriors against one another, and in doing so, swept millions to their deaths in its turbulence. I write, of course, of one of the most insidious and dangerous internecine conflicts to rack our beloved Imperium in many centuries. The Badab War. The Imperium of Man wages war against untold enemies who seek to destroy its very foundations. Heretics, Xenos, and otherworldly beings vying for a chance to tear down the Emperor's star-spanning civilization. On only the rarest occasions do threats burgeon from within of a magnitude which threatens to fragment its glory. For today, we shall elucidate a war waged by a foolhardy tyrant, a schism so profound that after a decade of war waged by numerous Space Marine chapters to bring about its end, its aftermath still causes immense unease whenever it bears mention. The succession of the Maelstrom Warders, the Badab War. Such was the treachery of Luft Huron, the infamous tyrant of Badab, and such was the carnage wrought among the stars of the Maelstrom Zone that it rocked the faith and order of untold worlds never touched directly by its violence, and caused loyal subjects to look upon their protectors and fear. Such were the dire sins and hidden truths that lay beyond the war, that a pall of secrecy and lies descended about the conflict, even as it was fought, and rightly so. For the Badab War, its true nature and the questions it raises about the very psyche of the Imperium's greatest weapons of war, the Space Marine chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, are both shocking and fundamentally dangerous. The deeper facts of the war I therefore consider to be a moral threat to all servants and citizens of the Imperium, except at the most high and measured levels, and it is my wholehearted recommendation that the distribution of this treatise be restricted to only the most esteemed among our sacred ordos. Better for humanity the simple tale of heroes and monsters, treachery and courage that is left to the official record, such as it is. Better the lie. The treatise compiled here, then, endeavors to be as accurate a general précis and briefing of the real events of the Badab War as possible. It is culled from the archives of the Holy Ordos, and from such sources and extant documentation, mimetic cerebral recovery, and eyewitness accounts that have so far survived the 20 standard years since the fall of the tyrant. It is also based in some cases on evidence that has purposely been hidden from the Edict of Obliteration enacted on the official war record. It will detail also the great schism that led up to the war, and the important worlds, locations, and battles that made up the course of the conflict. Of greatest import, in its appendix, it will also detail those Space Marine chapters involved in the Badab War, their unique character, and those warriors within them whose role became prominent in the war, be they hero or monster. This, then, is the true and secret history of the Badab War. The Maelstrom, officially designated as the Maelstrom Adjacent Autonomous Imperial Resource Extraction Zone 004-357 during 580.M41, this blight upon the star since the days of the Great Crusade, has required constant monitoring for signs of invasion by both Chaos and Xenos incursions. A colossal warp storm, second in size only to the infamous Eye of Terror, following the destruction of the heavily militarized and substantially populated hive world of Synax during 577.M41, the system had become a haven for pirate corsairs and alien raiders. Establishing a band of Space Marines during 587.M41, who would patrol the phenomena and combat any foe willing to harry the Imperium's valuable outposts within its proximity, the so-called Maelstrom Warders would be drawn from among the most well-regarded chapters. Comprised of the Lamenters, Mantis Warriors, and Charnel Guard, most revered of all such members would be their leaders, the Astral Claws, a chapter who had won glories aplenty during their tenure of over 5 millennia of service. The Maelstrom Zone, beset by several Orc raids during the tenure of the Astral Claws' then chapter master, Rovik Blake, though such Astartes would pursue their foe into the heart of the Maelstrom aboard their flagship, Seraph of Judgment. During 715.M41, Blake would perish in combat. Their third captain, Luft Huron, appointed as chapter master following the death of Blake. This youngest Astartes to have ever earned such a lofty position would waste no time in reforging his chapter's organization to secure the Maelstrom Zone. Reorganizing the Astral Claws in radical ways, such as expanding their fleet with captured ships, their stockpile of Exterminator's weapons would secure their uncontested dominance of the Maelstrom Zone, as part of their scorched planet policies, swiftly uprooting Xenos and heretical insurgents. The capital of Badab Prime erupting into civil war during 718.M41, the Astral Claws interrogated the nobles responsible for instigating such unrest, finding them in cahoots with off-world smugglers and raiders. Executing the traitor nobility, Huron installed himself as ruler of the planet and self-styled tyrant of Badab, the surrounding sector and Maelstrom Zone entire bending to his will as his allied chapters enforced his authority. Proclaiming such methods to better protect these worlds and those souls that dwell upon them in the glory of the Emperor, Huron styled himself as the founder of a new micro-empire, attempting to mimic the glory of Ultramar, enshrining himself alike to the position of the Avenging Sun. Organizing his own Tyrant's Legion of planetary defense forces, the Astral Claws trained such mortals to bolster the Badab sector's defenses, as Huron slowly reduced his gene-seed tithes to the Magos and Viglia of the Mechanicus. The Astral Claws' renown spreading beyond the Maelstrom Zone, pirate activity was quelled system-wide as the mining outposts of the Pale Stars reached never-before-achieved capabilities of harvesting ore and crystals. Sending a formal petition to the Throne World detailing his plans to subdue the Maelstrom and its surrounding areas, Huron's demands of additional space marines, perhaps including new foundings to aid his ambitions, was seen as an absurd proposal. Dismissed out of hand by the Imperium due to the countless war zones requiring reinforcement all across the galaxy, Huron would not take such a rejection lightly, beginning his controversial actions which would begin the Badab Schism of 748.M41. Withholding the Maelstrom Zone's ties to the Imperium in order to facilitate his goal of purging the Maelstrom himself using such resources, Huron began to reinforce the Badab sector's defenses, creating a circlet of orbital defenses known as the Ring of Steel. Demolishing the ancient citadel of Badab Primaris in order to erect his own new fiefdom, the Palace of Thorns, Huron ordered the construction of this near-impenetrable fortress, following the outlines and blueprints of his own designs. For over 150 years, the Schism drained the Administratum of their much-needed resources, the Cafargo sector suffering isolated under the protection of their Segmentum Procurator General, with little to repay their overlords. The Astral Claws, quelling the Fourth Quadrant Rebellion of the Lycanthos system, now swelled with renewed strength. Luft Huron commanded the assembled Astartes task force of the Firehawks, White Scars, Celestial Guard, Legio Venator, Death Corps of Krieg, and Kolstek regiments. Victorious over the forces of Chaos within less than a year of campaigning, Chapter Master Stebor Lazarek of the Firehawks regardless refused to serve under Huron's command again due to an unknown slight. Joining the Black Templars in their efforts to bring war to the Maelstrom during 869.M41, whilst the Scions of Sigismund attacked from the eastern marches, the Astral Claws, Mantis Warriors, and Lamenters invaded from the southern, northern, and eastern approaches. Destroying 23 Xenos and Heretic stronghold worlds, including one belonging to the Wordbearers, the Maelstrom Warders and their Black Templars allies had made the greatest inroads into this dangerous territory ever recorded in Imperial history. Combating the flesh haunters of the Howling Gaia, the Astral Claws' first company, led by Luft Huron himself, unleashed virus bombs within their carcass vaults, ending a threat which had plagued the Imperium since prior to the Age of Apostasy. The Black Templars' Crusade fleet called away to aid the realm of Ultramar in combating the remnants of the First Tyrannic War. The Maelstrom Warders returned to Badab as heroes, yet High Fleet Behemoth had displaced threats from the Eye of Terror and Ghoul Stars. Revolts and warp phenomena flaring within the Maelstrom Zone, orcs in numbers not seen since the Battle of Helsiris beset the Endymion cluster, whilst warp storms suffocated travel routes. the Tyrant of Badab, enforcing pogroms to cleanse the Maelstrom Zone, stewing as he was in melancholy for not achieving his goal of purging the Maelstrom fully. Untold threats at the dawn of 900.M41 threatened to destabilize his gains. Yet as the Badab system was beset by foes aplenty, so too would the Carthans and their Administratum allies inflict their first act of reprisal against Huron. TIE Fleet VX542-11, this is your final warning. Decrease thruster burn and heave to the designated approach. You will be fired upon. This investigation deputation carries the seals of the Adeptus Terra. It is you who will comply. Make obeisance and stand down your weapons immediately in the name of him on Terra. Damn you, obey! I don't care if you're carrying St. Lero's bones. No vessel enters the Ring of Steel without first submitting to inquiry and piloting. This is the Maelstrom Zone, not some safe haven quill pusher's enclave.
Heavy damage sustained to port engines. Deck 7 through 11 open to void. Casualties high. Assailants unidentified. 18 plus vessels now burning. Primary quadrant autonomous battle system registering full activation. Omega locks disengaged. 4,000 assassin mines awakening. Gargoyle platforms Anima and Epsilon reaching terminal power.
By the Tyrant! Shall we attempt abort? Confirm! Confirm! Dispatching an Imperial investigation TIE fleet, commanded by an Administrator Messiah General during 901.M41, representatives of the Mechanicus Biologus Invigila, Lords of Cafargo, and an independent Inquisitor demanded immediate resources. Huron's Ring of Steel, firing upon the mass conveyors, locust caravels, and escort ships, following a communications error, the Tyrant of Badab would nonetheless not entertain such a meager threat. Cafargo's System Sector Governor, Tanit Koenig, outraged at such a barbaric action. Her calls for the arrest of Huron fell on deaf ears, despite similar petitions by the Magos Invigila. The Adeptus Terra slow to react, busy with wars on countless fronts against numerous foes. The Priesthood of Earth proved unwilling to disregard Huron as a bulwark against the terrors of the Maelstrom, despite his erratic actions. The Carthan Imperial Command dispatching 2 further punitive expeditions to the Maelstrom Zone, despite investigations made 3 years following their dispatch. No trace of such vessels would ever be found. By 903.M41, both the Segmentum Assizes and Senatorum Imperialis spread propaganda throughout their domains, decrying the moral corruption, treachery, and pride of the Tyrant of Badab. The High Lords of Terra pressuring local Administratum officials to punish the Astral Claws for their actions. Luft Huron in response produced the infamous document known as the Articles of Secession, signed and ratified by the Lamenters and Mantis warriors, proclaiming the Maelstrom Warders to have officially severed their ties to neighboring systems, passages citing the many and grievous insults, presumptions, and denials of the Emperor-given rights and titles of the Adeptus Astartes by the false and wayward servants of the Administratum did little to ease tensions. Calling into question the rulership of the Carthan sector, authority of the Adeptus Terra, and privileges of the Astartes Creed, as Imperial shipping passages began to see rising attacks from aggressive Astral Claws voidcraft, the Carthans' anger grew. Their Administratum Officio besieged upon the world of Sagan. As the Cafargo sector mobilized for war, Sector Governor Koenig petitioned appeals to Space Marine chapters to fight beside her people. The Firehawks, answering the rallying call of the Carthans, whose dockyards of Sidon Ultra had often resupplied their forces. This pious chapter agreed to investigate the disappearance of their TIE fleets, diverting from their maneuvers of the Golgothan wastes bordering the Maelstrom Zone. Chapter Master Stibor Lazarek, needing little encouragement to find an excuse to vent his prior grievances against Luft Huron. His voidcraft, Red Harbinger, entered the Endymion cluster during 904.M41. Surrounded by Mantis warrior patrols within the Galen system. With the Firehawks' refusal to stand down, the Mantis warriors boarded the Red Harbinger, inflicting losses upon the Firehawks and capturing the survivors, numbering less than 20 men. The crew of the Red Harbinger, sending an astropathic message of the Mantis warriors' hostilities, Stibor unleashed his entire chapter to combat the secessionists. Escalating the conflict with deployment of his initial battle groups to besiege Galen. Though the Mantis warriors would return their captors to the chapter, the full might of their aggrieved kindred soon arrived in system. Their enormous star fortress, the Rapturus Rex, establishing itself as a staging ground in orbit of Sagan. Alongside the Carfen fleet, the Firehawks launched a series of probing attacks and recon missions within both the Badab sector and Endymion cluster, stirring the proverbial hornet's nest as the secessionists mobilized to combat such invaders. The Firehawks bore the brunt of the tyrant's wrath, burning crops of the agri-world of Iblis to draw out the Mantis warriors. Pinned upon Iblis by the Mantis warriors, the Astral Claws and Lamentus chapters descended upon Sagan, seeking to disrupt this crucial gateway to the Maelstrom Zone. The defenders routed within mere days, even with the support of the Carfen militia. The Firehawks, having suffered grievous casualties, withdrew from Iblis, ruining its surface with a barrage from the Rapturous Rex as their parting gift to the Mantis warriors. Breaching the secessionist blockade, thanks to their starfort's incredible firepower, destroying their enemy's only Mars-patterned battlecruiser, the Sacred Tetrarch, though a ceasing of hostilities would follow with the arrival of the Marines errant to the fray. War once more called to the Maelstrom Zone. Answering the Firehawks' plight as steadfast allies of their chapter, 6 companies of the Marines errant combated the secessionist defenders for months of protracted minor clashes. The Marines errant's maneuvers exacerbated by their blood spilled alongside the Lamentus chapter during the Corinth Crusade. Oaths of loyalty were abandoned as the two fought one another in open conflict, diminishing their bonds forged in prior battles. The Firehawks, Marines errant, and Carfens desperately outnumbered. The arrival of a company of the Executioner's chapter aboard their Voidcraft, Night Hag, bound by oaths of allegiance to the Astral Claws chapter, only worsened their plight. Governor Koenig's people, verging on bankruptcy with the war's escalation, her drastic mission to claim the tithes of the Vayania and Chimera depots of the Western Maelstrom would be aided by the Marines errant strike group, Mercurio. Set upon by the secessionists, already aware of their intentions, the ambush of the Astral Claws and Lamenters forfeit the last remnant of the Carfen Navy, with the Marines errant strike cruiser, Starjackal, barely escaping. Attempting to drive the Firehawks from the campaign with a concerted push towards the Golgothan wastes. Meanwhile, the Mantis warriors lured the Marines errant into a trap upon the industrial moon of Bellerophon's Fall. The vital supply and navigation hub, fiercely contested by both sides of the war. The Marines errant's 1st and 3rd companies took massive casualties within the rust zones of the Fall, including their 3rd captain. Utterly repelling the initial loyalist reprisal of his domains, Luft Huron remained standing as the undisputed tyrant of Badab. Yet as word reached Imperial command of the worsening campaign, ever more chapters would be dispatched to enact retribution. Phantasmal horrors assailed the Lamentus captain, and the cries of countless damned souls claimed by the night moaned their endless agony and outraged betrayal at him. The face of every man, woman and child he'd ever tried to save and lost came to him with crushing clarity. Every life he'd taken, every comrade he'd lost. "I am of the scions of Sanguinius," he whispered, defying the horrors invading his mind. "Mine is the glory of sacrifice eternal. Mine is the duty that never ends." Dimly, as the visions left him, he saw the hooked-fingered, half-shadow skeleton thing crawling lustfully across the decks and walls of the bridge chamber, feasting on the dying. He heard their razor-sharp talons skittering at the plates of his armor, half real and half unreal. Abruptly, the ghostlight failed and the bridge was plunged again into darkness as the wave of psychic nightmare radiating from the hulk passed over. Behind him, somewhere, a data loom exploded like a shrapnel bomb, and new alarm sirens howled as the holosphere stuttered back into life. Richter reached his goal at last and collapsed on top of the Bombardier's console like a puppet with his strings cut, coughing out a mess of stagnant blood and teeth across the activation panel. With his last ebbing strength, he pushed aside the body of Brother Falco, his master gunner. The eye lenses of the dead Space Marine's helm burned out to blackened holes. Beneath him, Status Auguries blinked ruddily, and firing litanies spooled by at a crazed speed as the machine spirit sought constantly to hold a weapons lock on a target that wasn't entirely within mortal reality. "Emperor bless you, Falco, and take you to your rest," he whispered. Richter slammed down his weight on the master arming lever, and seconds later was rewarded as the strike cruiser bucked and rumbled beneath him with familiar thunder. The flickering image on the holosphere was blasted and riven as the comet-like flares of the macro shells hurled forth into the belly of the beast, shearing off great clods of debris into the void and crackling the twisted arcs of its hull, which bled thick, boiling light. In the dark recesses of Richter's soul, he felt his inhuman enemy scream in frustration and pain. "We can also Hate. Richter smiled through torn flesh. As the war elapsed into its 5th year, a triumvirate of imperial legates was sent to pronounce judgment, bearing the seal of the High Lords of Terra. This deputation of the Ordo Hereticus, supported by a battle group of Segmentum Solar, analyzing the situation. Uncovering the disastrous consequences of Huron's hubris upon their arrival, the legates of Terra declared the violence of Badab to be a matter of imperial security rather than a civil conflict, demanding the surrender of the secessionists. Luft Huron refusing to comply to such demands, the legates proclaimed the Maelstrom Warders to be enemies of the Imperium, further plunging the Badab system into greater conflict. The Red Scorpions chapter, selected as the supreme commanders of the campaign, alongside the Salamanders, Raptors, and Fire Angels, the tide began to turn in the Loyalist' favour, with the Firehawks and Marines Errant relieved of duty. The Firehawks enacting one last act of vengeance upon the secessionists, known as the firebombing of Sacristan. This callous act of no strategic value would be remembered as a stark sign of the wasteful loss of life to follow. Overall command of the war, whilst technically the responsibility of Legate Inquisitor John Disfrain, in practice, Lord High Commander Verant Ortiz of the Red Scorpions enacted the first crucial step of the renewed campaign, the Battle of Silent Reach, during 906.M41. Gauging the strength of the Lamenters chapter and mortal defenders of the Maelstrom. From Galen to Grief, the naval war wrought casualties on both sides of the conflict due to their refusal to commit their main battle lines. Destroying the secessionist Overlord-class battlecruiser, Gauntlet of Wrath, as a turn of good fortune, the Red Scorpions capitalized on such a kill, forcing the defenders to flee. Tanit Koenig, meanwhile judged guilty of provoking the war by the Legate Inquisitors. Upon the Carthan capital of Sidon Ultra, the governor and her house were executed for licentious ambition and wanton misrule, unbecoming of a servant of the Emperor. Administratum officials, forcibly extracting tithe costs to be paid to the Adeptus Terra in full. The 14 billion-strong populace of Sidon Ultra has toiled in indentured servitude for over 6 generations to repay such a debt, which is still being collected to this day. The Marines Errant and Firehawks, cleared of heretical or seditious intent, pledging their remaining forces to aid in support roles of the war. Despite heavy resistance, the Loyalists managed to contain the advance of Huron's forces, slowly revealing vulnerabilities to exploit. Conducting heavy raid actions within the Viania system, wherein its primary world of the same name served as a crucial gatehouse, providing stable warp routes around the Maelstrom, the civil unrest of the populace would further aid the Loyalists. The newly arrived Nova Marines pledging their strength to aid in the three-pronged assault of the Viania system. Alongside the Red Scorpions and Marines Errant, the Astartes faced their first instance of the Tyrant's Legion, whilst targeting orbital transshipping platforms. Underestimating the mortal defenders, ignorant of their training by Astral Claws veterans, the Loyalists gained little ground, securing only 4 orbital platforms, causing little disruption of the planet's production capabilities. Inflicting a kill ratio of 178-1 against the Tyrant Legion. Despite such losses, the armies of Huron had plenty of souls for the meat grinder to spare, each subsequent rail of the Viania system inflicting greater casualties, with the Loyalists often focusing fire on their Astral Claws overlords. Failing to drive the secessionists from Viania, the Loyalists pivoted their attentions to securing the fortress world of Cerngrad, a neutral party in the Maelstrom Zone, which, despite resisting bending the knee to Huron, had begun to falter due to internal strife. Losing their northern citadels to Tyrant sympathizers within their midst, the Loyalists could not allow such a reliable bastion to fall to enemy hands. Yet before further bloodshed was spilled, the secessionists attempted a gambit to bring hostilities to an end.
Hostile contact!
Brother Carden shouted as the thin air erupted with streaks of flame from above. Dane brought his assault cannon around to face the new threat, the barrel spinning up to speed with a high-pitched buzz. His auto sensors locked onto the targets advancing from an upper deck across the vaulted gantries. They were different to the last foes, heavy, regular shapes, advancing with measured discipline. Their interlaced fire patterns precise and targeted. Space Marines. Bolt of fire exploded against his helmet's faceplate, seeking near non-existent chinks in his tactical dreadnought armor. Base traitors, turncoat brothers, Huron's lapdogs. Dane thought. Who else could it be? If the signal was true, and Lord Commander Ortiz was dead by the Tyrant's betrayal, then there could not be enough dead Astral Claws to pay the blood price. Despite his battle calm, Dane felt himself sneer viciously as he unleashed the assault cannon, and a 2-meter tongue of muzzle flash lit up the darkness of the broken iron chamber. Above him, the gantry disintegrated into metal splinters and leaping sparks, eaten away in seconds by the barrage of explosive shells. First one, then two, then a third armored figure fell with the gantry debris. Severed limbs, shattered ceramite, and smoldering bodies crashing down before him. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Huron sending emissaries to meet with the Loyalist commanders with an offer of ceasefire. Despite the objections of Legate Inquisitor Frayne, Lord High Commander Ortiz accepted such an offer, arranging to meet upon an abandoned way station in orbit of the gas giant, Shedim. Chapter Masters Huron, Ortiz, Lazarek, and Master Sartak of the Mantis Warriors quickly blaming one another for committing crimes against Imperial law. The parley would be adjourned due to the impetuous display of the secessionists. Each chapter master returning to their Thunderhawks without harassment in order to uphold their honor. Regardless, 3 unannounced void craft fired upon the way station, killing Ortiz and Sartak. Red Scorpion's chief librarian, Severin Roth, leading a counterattack against the secessionists. His effort secured the body of his murdered chapter master before the asteroid belt collapsed around them. The event henceforth known as the Betrayal at Greef. Though neither side could provide evidence of one another's involvement, Huron's early departure had resulted in many suspecting the tyrant to be the architect of such an underhanded ploy. Casualties mounting on both sides following the betrayal at Greef. The Red Scorpions appointed their first captain, Karab Kuln, as their new Lord Commander, and reorganized their battle lines with the arrival of the Howling Griffins, Sons of Medusa, and remainder of the Nova Marines chapter. Converting the mining world of Hallows Point into the new staging ground of the Loyalists, Vengeance Station, as it would be known, was operational before a solar year had elapsed. Taking the initiative to combat the secessionists with renewed purpose, in honor of Ortiz, the Loyalists spearheaded by the Red Scorpions conducted probing attacks within the Endymion cluster. The Sons of Medusa and Nova Marines crucial in garrisoning the barren Chimera system, as the Salamanders, Raptors, and Fire Angels ventured into the jungles of Gargafia 3, striking at the Astral Claws defenders with hit-and-run guerrilla tactics. Driving the Astral Claws from the planet during 907.M41, as the campaign drew into its 7th year, the Marines errant withdrew from the campaign entirely, earning their much-deserved time to replenish their forces. The Firehawks, less willing to retire from the campaign, with grievances still standing, Karab Kuln ordered their number to redeploy to the Loyalist rearguard, allowing the Rapturous Rex to vanguard Hallows Point during the construction of Vengeance Station. Pressing the advantage while the secessionists reeled from their advances, Karab Kuln made haste to secure Cerngrad, ordering the Salamanders and Raptors to launch strike forces, supporting their battle barges the Pyre of Glory and War Talon. Forced back by the defenders of the Fortress World, suffering heavy damage to their War Talon, the chapters launched a diversionary attack on the Equatorial Zone, dubbed as Operation Sedna. The Raptors covertly deploying a strike team which would march for weeks to reach their target. Under the cover of a blinding gale, the Astartes breached the fortress walls of their orbital defense complex, sabotaging the base's weapon silos. Sacrificing men to the guns of the Astral Claws to allow their kindred in orbit a chance of reprieve, both battle barges moved into the atmosphere, destroying the secessionist defenders and claiming Cerngrad for the Loyalists. The Howling Griffins, faring worse during their combat made on the world of Chimera. The Executioner's chapter arrived within the Maelstrom Zone at full strength, destroying the Loyalist outposts upon the Night Moons of the Chimera system. Attempting to garrison the planet, as each bastion surrounding Chimera fell to ruin, the blood of the Howling Griffins soaked the earth until the restraint of High Chaplain, Fulsa Kane, ordered his men to withdraw, having achieved their objectives. The Howling Griffins' forces largely annihilated within a single engagement. The loss of their cruiser, Uguayus, and venerable Chaplain Dreadnought, Titus, proved a devastating blow to the chapter's morale. Refusing to retreat from the campaign, regardless of their losses, the Howling Griffins would doggedly fight on for 2 further years of grueling combat, their honor intact as defiant martyrs of the Imperium. The incidents of Xenos pirates and demon corsairs, and even the ravages of the Orc warband of Gorchompa harrying the Kalar system as the Loyalists gained ground. Both sides of the human conflict suffered from terrorized supply lines until the Mantis Warriors confronted the 20,000-strong Greenskin army within the Endymion system. The infested world of Magog, a thorn in the side of the secessionist forces, Corian Sumatris of the Astral Claws led the cleansing of the planet alongside a hand-picked Terminator squad of Lamentus veterans, reclaiming the world at great cost before the Chaos threat could burgeon. As the tribulations of the secessionists mounted, the arrival of an infamous chapter of Space Marines would add woes in excess to even the most devastating Chaos incursion. The Minotaurs chapter, arriving at full strength within system under direct orders of the High Lords of Terra. Their invasion of the mining facilities of Cairo heralded their arrival to both sides of the conflict in typically brutal fashion, sundering 46,000 soldiers of the Tyrant's Legion before presenting themselves to the Loyalist War Council. The infamous Asterian Moloch remained with his men to spearhead their assault of the Pale Stars region, starving the secessionist war effort of supplies by conducting scorched earth assaults of their production facilities. Though the Loyalists welcomed such capable Astartes into the fold, none echoed sentiments of camaraderie or brotherhood with such menacing allies. Operating largely independently from Loyalist maneuvers, much to the relief of all involved. As the Minotaurs rampaged, only the Executioners could prove capable of surviving the worst of their onslaughts. As the Minotaurs drove the secessionists from several key positions across the Maelstrom Zone, the remaining Tyrant Legion defenders of Viania were purged in a joint operation, finally wresting control of the system from its oppressors. The Salamanders and Fire Angels struggling to secure the world of Galen. As the campaign dragged into the year of 908.M41, evidence of heretic scavengers would reach Loyalist command staged upon the world of Synax, deploying the Atropos clan of the Sons of Medusa to investigate with fresh arrivals of the Exorcist chapter supporting their endeavor. As the Loyalists garrisoned the planet, its defenders dug into their hives, awaiting the storm to come. The Exorcists withdrawing from the planned scourging, with claims of the Sons of Medusa pursuing objectives of their own agenda. As the tech savants of the Moray Schism persecuted their mission as they saw fit, the Exorcists joined the impending second battle for Sagan. Wet black steam hissed from the opened aperture, and a hulking form materialized from the darkness. A Space Marine in Terminator armor, whose grey livery faded from the umbra of a darkened thunderhead to the deathly pallor of a winter mist. The armor itself unlike anything Montressa had seen, except in faded chronicles of forbidden history. The figure was huge, even for a Space Marine so raimented, and as its armored foot hammered onto the gantry like a bell strike, the Fire Angels accompanying them fell into battle stance. Coldly focusing on his sworn task, despite the shadow of death he felt looming over him, Montressa logged the image of the Terminator and translated the armorial warding he saw there. The dialect was old, a subtongue of High Gothic he traced to the solar court of the early 33rd millennium. Tyberos, it read, of the Red Wake. Quickly, he signaled this information to his master's box implant. Legate Inquisitor Jarndis Frayne stood before the hulking figure, as if daring death to strike him down, and raised high the scepter, touched by the hands of the High Lords of Terra themselves. With sudden and unexpected grace, the massive Terminator slid to his knees before the Black Cossack man, who was but a fraction of his size. Armored gauntlets went to the Terminator's helm, and the fastenings hissed open, amber light dying in the helm's optic lenses. The scarred face that was revealed was sharp-visaged and waxen, deathly white, the eyes as fathomless and pitiless a black as the dark between the stars. "Hail the Emperor," the Carcharodon whispered, through rows of ivory teeth. Enacting the largest Loyalist assault of the campaign thus far, consisting of the Red Scorpions, Salamanders, Raptors, Nova Marines, Fire Angels, and Exorcists. Despite the Astral Claw's desperate attempt to deploy viral weapons, their forces were utterly destroyed. The Fire Angels incurring by far the most casualties, as they commit their entire chapter to the offensive. The Second Battle of Sagan rolled the highest death toll of the war, yet won the Loyalists a major strategic victory. Sagan reinforced as the primary base of operations for the Loyalists. Control of its stable warp routes enabled free movement of their forces across the Maelstrom Zone, whilst denying the same to the secessionists. Cerngrad, fully relieved and reinforced, aiding in the Howling Griffin's relief. The Mantis warriors now stood as the most vulnerable enemy combatants, positioned as they were within the Endymion cluster, isolating the chapter from their allies as the Loyalists began the suppression of Endymion. Whilst the Tyrant of Badab stewed within his own fiefdom, his allies relied upon commerce raids and targeted strikes to survive. Having effectively contained the secessionists, Loyalist Command ordered the Nova Marines, Raptors, and Howling Griffins to withdraw from the conflict, with honor due to each having suffered numerous casualties, which required replenishment. Reinforcement of the Segmentum Solar, replacing veterans of the campaign relieved of their duty. The spy networks of Legate Inquisitor Frayne sought to remove an enemy chapter from the war zone, having now separated them from one another. Targeting the Lamentus chapter, patrolling the Pale Stars region to protect the southern flank of the Badab system. The Minotaurs chapter reveled in the chance to bring Terra's judgment to the long-suffering sons of the Great Angel. Assaulting the Lamentus mobile gene bank, the Mater Lacrimarum in orbit of the feral world of Optera 5. Having baited the chapter with the threat of extinction, the Minotaurs unleashed their entire chapter strength. 17 hours of ship-to-ship fighting, dwindling the Lamentus number to only 311 remaining Astartes. The chapter surrendered rather than face extinction, and were sent to the prison hulk orbiting Sagan II to languish for the remainder of the war. Replete of a stalwart ally, cracks started to form within the secessionist forces, the Loyalists redeploying to the world of Angstrom in order to deliver another decisive blow to bring the war to an end. The Mechanicus stronghold, having rejected diplomatic resolution with both sides of the conflict. Every 3 years, the manufacturing powerhouse had left bounties for either to secure, caring not for the victor of the war. The Salamanders and Red Scorpions, staging a mission to prevent the secessionist forces from claiming the impending bounty. Karab Koln and Captain Pelas Mirsan ambushed the exchange upon Angstrom 13, sabotaging the planet's starports and disabling enemy aircraft. Enraged by the violence spilling forth upon their domains, the Mechanicus defenders fired upon both sides of the fray. The Angstrom Incident, as it would be known, enacted by the Loyalists to secure a strategic victory, allowing for a peace to be brokered by the Legate Inquisitors, whilst the Firehawks blockaded the planet against secessionist intervention. Now holding dominion of both Sagan and Viania, the Loyalists rapidly gained ground, each neutral party forced to choose a side as the secessionist armies continued to dwindle. The Fire Angels and Sons of Medusa suppressing the Tranquility, Iblis, and Sigurd systems, though the Fire Angels sustained heavy casualties with the destruction of their strike cruiser, Polaris Rising, at the hands of an Orc incursion. The Mantis warriors, resorting to hit-and-run tactics, now cornered with nowhere to retreat. Regardless, such warriors culled the Orcs besetting the Polaris Rising, claiming the vessel for themselves and allowing the surviving 37 Fire Angels to be marooned upon the world of Sigurd VI. The systems of Eshuna, Decabalus, and Isin bolstering the Badab sector. Huron abandoned his allies to their fates as he continued to fortify his territories. The Mantis warriors struggling to remain active, whilst the Executioners remain the most capable of all Huron's allies. Yet as the year of 910.M41 began, Loyalist Command beheld a fire-scorched strike cruiser known as the Levitus Vex arrive within the Synax system. Its hails bearing an ancient ident code as an allied force, doing little to diminish their grim demeanor. The Carcharodon's Astra, formally requesting acceptance within the battle lines of the Loyalist Astartes, the remainder of the chapter's fleet traversed the edge of the Golgothan wastes with sanction to draw blood. Such pilgrims of the dark corners of the void, displaying their vicious martial prowess during the first deployment within the Sigurd system. Within weeks, the Carcharodons demolished citadels which had held strong for millennia. Redeploying to the world of Iblis, wherein the planet's rulers were swiftly put to the sword and its verdant fields turned to wasteland. The dominions of the Mantis warriors each fell to ruin as the grim harvesters of the Outer Dark advanced. The Carcharodon's assault of the industrial world of Endymion Prime, leaving its garrisoned Fire Angels witness to the slaughter enacted to lure the Mantis warriors to their position. The Red Wake, Tyberos, repeated the same maneuver upon the worlds of Sisfal, Largitor, and other planets within the Tranquility system. So effective was the Tranquility campaign of the Carcharodons that the Mantis warriors were broken within months of their arrival to the war zone. The Endymion cluster now posing no threat, leaving the Badab system alone as the last bastion of the secessionists.
It is done then. The rumors were true. The tyrant has set himself against them all,
Hakon asked. Aye, and taken the other waters with him, Kane replied with a snarl.
The warp runner put into dock at the Darken Vault 8 standard hours ago, and the simpering lapdog he sent aboard delivered me this.
Your decision.
To side with one is to break faith with the other, but an oath is an oath. Throne or savior, blood calls out for blood. We honor our debts regardless,
Hakon stated gravely. Though it is perhaps our doom.
We are the headsmen of him on Terra, sons of Dawn, born of battle and death, his executioners. What care we of doom or fate? We must send aid to the tyrant immediately. Blood will have blood, and the Maelstrom will be awash with it ere long.
Vanir Hex makes ready even now with his brethren, and the night hag is eager to slip her dock and find prey. He awaits only your command, Kane said. Hakon chuckled darkly. It was not a pleasant sound.
You knew my answer already, old monster.
I taught you well, Kane replied.
Well enough to know I must bear this sin myself. I shall make the journey into the outer dark to offer the Emperor the coin of my life to pay for our coming transgression. Let it all be done in my name. Gather our axes and take the chapter to Badab, Tulsa Kane, my High Mortiarg, and let there be no new Lord Executioner till our blood oath is discharged. No master to be marked with its sin but me.
Kane knelt before his master and received into his hands the massive black-bladed power axe, Life Taker, that was the sign and mark of the chapter master's office.
If it is to be an ending, make it such an ending that the screams of our enemies echo as far as the throne itself,
Hakon whispered, and walked out into the storm. Tulsa Kane's half-dead face twisted into something resembling a smile. Splitting their forces to relieve the Minotaurs and Red Scorpion's forces divided amongst the Maelstrom Zone. With the dawn of the year 911.M41, only the Executioners and Astral Claws remained. The Fire Angels withdrawing from the conflict, following their disgust felt at the methods used by the Carcharodon Zastra. Karab Koln convened a council to decide the next stage of the war, wary of the tyrant's plan to divide his forces, to bleed them slowly. Salamander's captain, Pelas Mirsan, advising his company to assault the Lambton system using his Voidcraft Pyre of Glory. Uncharacteristically, the Minotaur's chaplain, Ivanis Enkomi, offered the aid of his personal guard to aid in their mission. Accepting the proposal of the strike force, known as the Gift of Fire, to attack Lambton, their vessels would depart from Sagan, moving directly through the Maelstrom to reach their target unseen. Arriving within reach of the feral world of Shaprius, Mirsan's forces cited evidence of a ragtag armada guarding the disposable armies on the surface, consisting of tribal warriors intended for some unknown assault. Ordering a drop-pod assault without delay, as the Pyre of Glory fired bombardments on the training camps on the surface, the Salamanders and Minotaurs, once landed, targeted the most entrenched enemy positions. Outnumbered more than 1,000 to 1, the Astartes regardless fought their way to a surrounded position, the leaderless mob of mutants proving no match for a disciplined Astartes company, as thousands fell within minutes of combat. Confronted by Astral Claw's Retaliator squads, the thralls of the Tyrant regardless proved no match for the Salamanders. Mirsan's Land Raiders held in reserve, joining the fray, blasting through their enemies with Thunderfire cannons. What remained of the Astral Claws, sundered by the fury of 6 ancient dreadnoughts, 2 fell in battle as Huron's men gave their lives dearly to achieve even a hint of reprisal against their foe. The Minotaur's Devastator and Terminator squads meeting sturdier resistance. Regardless, their brutal vanguard, evenly matched in number against the Astral Claws, tore through the defenses spearheaded by Land Raider and Siege Dreadnought assault. Chaplain and Comey bounding into the fray via jetpack assault. As the Astral Claws perished, both Loyalist forces reconvened to investigate the tunnels below the training camp. Discovering heretic laboratories filled with Imperial prisoners and a vault of stolen gene seed, the corpse-taker apothecaries of the Astral Claws had scavenged materials from friend and foe alike to quickly rebuild their chapter. Returning to the Pyre of Glory to find the naval battle above to have disabled their allied vessel, the Epona. After 11 days of combat, Strikeforce Gift of Fire had fought at a crucial staging ground of the enemy. Attempting to return to Sagan, the Gift of Fire regardless would be beset by a warp squall, hurling the Pyre of Glory far off course to Kala Shoals. Confronted by the Astral Claws cruiser, Hyrcania, commanded by Arch-Centurion Karnak Commodus, the vengeful commander petitioned aid from the Executioners in order to enact vengeance for the loss of Shaprius. The Executioners' flagship, Phaeton's Wrath, commanded by Reclusiarch Fulsa Kane, disabled the Pyre of Glory, which aided the Astral Claws' boarding actions. Captain Mirsan, knowing such a fight to be doomed to fail, surrendering, offering Kane his sword as a sign of his submission. Arch-Centurion Commodus leading his men to the Salamander's armories, hoping to pilfer their vaults of gene seed. Upon hearing of such a slight, Fulsa Kane turned on his ally. ordering his corpse takers to kill the Salamander's apothecaries before turning their guns on the unarmed remaining Salamanders. Vulsa Kane became incensed with a murderous rage. Mirsan, noticing an opportunity, deriding the High Chaplain for his own failings, allying with such heretics. Declaring his chapter's blood oath to the Astral Claws to be forfeit, the infamous Red Hour saw Kane's men tear their once comrades to shreds, whilst Mirsan garrisoned the ship's inner sanctum with what remained of his men. The corridors of the Hyrcania splattered with the blood of Astral Claws Astartes, chapter serfs, and servitors. With Tulsa Kane's return, the Reclusiarch knelt before Mirsan, presenting the head of Arch-Centurion Commodus as a grim trophy. The executioners stood down, yet remained within system, for now Luft Huron truly stood alone. The tale of the Red Hour marking the executioners as a rogue element who would strike at Astral Claws and Loyalists alike, and thus was to be avoided. No sooner than his assessments were made, he was moving, thought and action as one, uncluttered by the need for self-doubt, indecision, or mortal fear. He covered half the distance between him and the ragged squad before the first one heard him and started to run. The blonde-haired one, no more than 17 years standard perhaps, he carried the squad's heavy stubber and thereby rated the greatest threat. He died first, the exploding bolt shell hollowing out his chest cavity in a welter of blood. The squad leader, an older, ill-shaven man, at the rear fell second, a headshot ending his life as he struggled to raise his shotgun. Then Tobias was in amongst them, his bolter on his belt and his combat blade drawn in a smooth, almost effortless motion. A backhanded chop of his gauntleted hand snapped the neck of the nearest trooper, while the blade took his neighbor's life, head lolling back obscenely from the open neck as the Legion trooper collapsed to his knees and expired. Then there were two, terrified recognition registering in their eyes that the giant figure looming before them was their death come round. One tried to fight, while the other turned to flee. The brave but doomed one raised his lasgun and fired, but the pulse of crackling light went wide as Tobias's blade had already found his heart.
To the brave, the quick embrace of death, and dispatch of the Emperor's judgment,
Tobias fought, quoting the chaplain's instructional sermons as if he had heard them only this morning, not a century before, as a novitiate under the light of a far-distant star. His eyes focused on the last trooper, scrambling and screaming across the rubble in a vain attempt to flee his doom.
But not so the coward. For him, agony. In this world and the next.
His mind finished the quote, and he sprang forward, as in the skies behind him, the Thunderhawk gunship swept in low to deliver their lethal cargo. Recording a message to be broadcast far and wide across the Maelstrom Zone, Huron once more declared his chapter shorn from the Imperium, proclaiming it to be a bankrupt, rotting carcass fit only for the grave. The Astral Claws defacing sigils of the Imperium, scouring them of their war gear and weapons. As the noose tightened around the tyrant's neck, his paranoia caused his chapter to strike at frightened civilians as Badab Primaris transformed into a living hell. Beginning their invasion of Badab with the nearby Piraeus system, should the Loyalists claim its orbital stations and minor shipyards, they would sustain a forward operating base to be maintained. Establishing secondary fronts on Isin and Dekabalos, facilitated by elements of the Red Scorpions, Exorcists, and Minotaurs. Such distractions would split the tyrant's forces, enabling a swifter conquest of Badab. Karab Kuln leading a contingent of his Red Scorpions alongside the Exorcists as they struck the lunar colonies of Critias Secundus. Near 600 Astartes were set back due to the failure of the Spear of Mazo's Gellerfield, delaying their forces to arrive hours apart. The Imperial Navy refusing to relent in their support of the Astartes forces, enemy resistance failed to blunt their advance, with only a meager fleet capable of repelling disorganized raiders. Enduring long-range torpedo bombardments as the Loyalist battleship, Throne of Blood, bombarded Piraeus 5, the defense fleet of the tyrant desperately hurled themselves into danger should a slim hope of blunting the Loyalist advance present itself. Combating the tyrant's legion on the surface as Red Scorpions and Exorcists unleashed their fury, regardless of their high casualties, the mortal Auxilia bottlenecked the landing zones with their dead, allowing the Astral Claws to spring their trap. Despoiling the naval fleet in orbit, Luft Huron at the forefront of 1,000 Astral Claws fought the Loyalists on the surface, his own war fleet deploying within an hour as hidden defenses all across Critias Secundus activated. Huron's flagship, the Seraph of Judgment, surrounded by 8 line-class vessels as they tore through the Loyalist fleet. 60 support voidcraft followed in their wake, readying to attack the separated strength of the Red Scorpions and Exorcists. The Exorcist's master of the fleet, Captain Waite Rider, feigning retreat of his forces to draw away the faster vessels of Huron's fleet. The forces of Vice Admiral Kagawa remained in place as slower Exorcist vessels, such as the Gauntlet of Ages, sacrificed themselves to buy time. The Red Scorpions clashing with the Astral Claws on the surface of Crataeus Secundus. Lord Commander Karib Kholn, alongside his chief librarian, Severin Loth, waded through the tyrant's forces. Luft Huron venting his frustrations against the Exorcists, as the men under the command of Captain Silas Alberaic fell in droves to his lightning claws. The 2 supreme commanders of the campaign eventually clashing in single combat as Kholn's Blade of the Scorpion vied for the blood of Huron. The Exorcist's Enochian Guard prevented from intervening as ancient dreadnought Claytor of the Astral Claws confronted Captain Silas. Alberaic's Terminator armor bore the brunt of his enemy's wrath before his relic mace felled the beast as revenge for his wounds sustained. Kholn and Huron's battle, more alike to a savage free-for-all than a duel of honor. Barbs of hatred spilled from their lips as gouges in their heavy plate were exchanged, the blood of Karib slick upon Luft's lightning claw. Taunting Huron that he was nothing more than a false king, no better than a pawn of the ruinous powers, as the tyrant overextended with a frenzied strike, Kholn carved through his Terminator armor with the Blade of the Scorpion, with a blow which would kill any other Astartes. Yet bitterness fueled the tyrant of Badab as he spun in place, his claw slicing through Karib's breastplate, evading a killing blow aimed at his hearts as he skidded down a slope of rubble, ending their duel. In orbit above, the Loyalist fleet reconcentrated their efforts, their status being outnumbered, countered by their abundance of more heavily armored vessels. The ragged column of the tyrant's fleet, regardless unable to match the tight formation of laterally positioned, more disciplined warships. Unleashing their broadsides to devastate the secessionists, the Loyalists destroyed ships such as the Dreadchild, Thoth's Hound, and Seraph of Judgment. The Mechanicus Voidcraft, Redeemer, extracting Red Scorpions and Exorcist forces from the surface as the least damaged vessel of the fleet. The assembled concentration of all vessels' Thunderhawks were stowed within its transport bays as Exorcist Librarian Taloth coordinated their landing zones. Driving back the Astral Claws, with the sudden arrival of the guns of the Redeemer, heralding apocalypse for any foolish enough to remain, the end of the 2-hour skirmish reported to have cost the Loyalists as much as 60% of their deployed Astartes strength. Treating the wounds of Karib Kholn as the Redeemer broke orbit from the moon's surface, both sides of the conflict claimed victory of the Battle of Piraeus, yet neither had endured its trials without catastrophic losses. The tyrant's fleet, now damaged to the point where it could no longer function in protracted naval engagements, the final linchpin of the Loyalist war effort had been achieved. For now, the Badab sector was vulnerable to one last assault. In an instant, he took in the armored form that had struck him down. The black of its armor marked it different from the rest, and tattered prayer scrolls and purity seals fluttered from rents in the Space Marine ceramite plating, which opened to gaping bloody wounds. On the black-armored Space Marine shoulder was the scoured remains of the white cheque and red symbol, which was enough to confirm Wotan's suspicions. The murderous figure whirled again and let out a cry, as much of anguish as rage, and brought the hammer down on the back of one of Wotan's Star Phantoms, who was trading blows with an enemy of his own. There was an explosive crack as the backpack was smashed to pieces, and the hammer crushed the life from the Star Phantom, who then collapsed like a bundle of rags. Still in his prone position against the wall, Wotan calmly ejected the half-spent magazine from his bolt pistol and fed in another, slipping the fire selector to Storm. Taking careful aim, he waited for the black-armored Space Marine to wheel around again, in search of another victim, and chose his moment precisely. A tongue of flame lashed from the pistol's muzzle, and the explosive bolts flew straight and true into the exposed join at the back of his enemy's knee, which came apart in a gout of shrapnel and clotted flesh, dropping Wotan's target onto his back. Wotan rose again to his feet and reclaimed his power sword from where it had been buried in the mosaic floor. As the weapon hummed to life in his gauntleted hand, he fought.
Even angels may fall.
He gave no sound as he swung the blade down. During 912.M41, the last stand of the Tyrant of Badab would beckon. The calm before the storm of the Loyalist final assault, known by historians as the Silent War. Hundreds of petty engagements, weeding out the stragglers of secessionist resistance beyond the bounds of the Badab system. Whilst the Minotaurs and Sons of Medusa protected supply lines, Imperial Guard regiments prevented the Pale Stars region from falling into anarchy. Lufthuron recalling all viable resources to garrison his domains, stripping worlds such as Isin and Decabalus of their defenses. Reports of the Tyrant's Legion abandoning their posts increased. Karib Kuln convening a war council within the Viania system with his remaining forces, the Salamanders, Firehawks, Minotaurs, Exorcists, Carcharodons, and Sons of Medusa began preparations with the aid of a delegation of the Archmagos Lords of Angstrom. Their ultimate objective to depose Lufthuron from his Palace of Thorns. With the Lamenters imprisoned, formal surrender of the Mantis warriors now ratified, and executioners displaced from the campaign, now was the time to strike. Denied reinforcements of Astra Militarum regiments and naval warships by the High Lords of Terra, due to the Imperium's need to combat the Great Devourer and awakening Necron tomb worlds across the galaxy, the Inquisition would nonetheless secure allies to enact the hammer blow. The enigmatic Star Phantoms chapter of Space Marines arriving at full chapter strength. Only once the Loyalists had amassed might enough to overwhelm their enemy would they enact their masterstroke. Reinforcing the Piraeus system with the Rapturous Rex as the Firehawks established a blockade, the Carcharodons were recalled from the Endymion cluster to support the Sons of Medusa hunter-killer missions against stubborn Executioner's resistance, rallying at the Crowsworld system. The Salamanders reinforced with the arrival of their vanguard cruiser, Obsidia, containing half a company of fresh battle brothers. Captain Mirsan, out of a sense of honor, sought out High Chaplain Fulsa Kane to negotiate a parley. Locating the Executioner's battle barge, Phaeton's Wrath, fighting the Sons of Medusa fleet within the Iridian Cataract, supported by the infamous cruiser Night Hag, Mirsan ordered the Obsidia to interpose itself between their broadsides, deactivating the vessel's weapons. Negotiating both sides to stand down, followed by the Sons of Medusa's departure, Mirsan convinced the Executioners to meet with Karib Kuln, orchestrating an honorable armistice wherein the Executioners would cease hostilities and depart from the Maelstrom Zone. Tulsa Kane and his men allowing themselves to be interred upon the Salamander's homeworld of Nocturne until the war had ended. The reputation of the first founding chapter proved a sufficient guarantor to prevent further bloodshed. Now ready to attack the Badab system, with no lingering enemies of note roaming the Maelstrom Zone, the Loyalists with the Star Phantoms at their spear tip invaded Huron's Ring of Steel. The Magos Lords of Angstrom identifying the node of control for the defenses to be located on the Star Fortress of Sentinel Sigma, orbiting Badab 6. Should such a facility be taken, the guns of the Ring of Steel could be deactivated. Setting a direct attack course for Badab 6, the Loyalist vanguard of 6 battle barges and 9 strike cruisers, 6 Imperial Navy ships, 84 escort ships, and the imposing Rapturous Rex tore through the Tyrant's defenses. The Firehawk Star Fortress towing a burning stellar core fragment taken from the Bale Cascade celestial body, this rogue star fragment was hurled directly at Sentinel Sigma Station, every weapon of the Ring of Steel targeting the star fragment, as tens of thousands of torpedoes, macro shells, and projectiles attempted to destroy the Bale Cascade. Blinded by the celestial fragment's light, much of the Ring of Steel's ordnance missed its mark, ending its trajectory at point-blank range of Sentinel Sigma, coating its shields with waves of lambent energy. The star fragment's destruction shining a light on the descending angels of death as they fell from the heavens. The Sons of Medusa and Exorcists unleashed fury upon Sentinel Sigma and the defenders of the Astral Claw's second company. Their leader, Captain Korean Samatris, attempting to drive back the assault of his station. Meanwhile, the Star Phantoms aboard their battle barge, the Memento Mori, struck the Starfort's network, capturing each node via boarding actions, one by one. Minotaur's vessels began their assault of the world of Badab Secundus, executing the governing nobility and military commandos. Asterion Moloch hurling the corpses of his enemies from the spires of the planet's oratory cathedral, slaying Astral Claw's chaplain, Varna Sabine, displaying his impaled body atop his personal Land Raider for all to witness. Iron Fane Valand Karl of the Sons of Medusa relaying word to Loyalist command that he had secured Sentinel Sigma. Within mere hours, the Ring of Steel, once thought to be impenetrable by the Tyrant of Badab, fell to ruin. Encircling Badab Primaris during 913.M41, the Loyalists would finally set foot upon the capital of the Maelstrom Zone. The Exorcist's fleet making short work of the Secessionist fleet in orbit, as the Rapturous Rex once more unleashed its fury upon the surface. Supported by Titans of Angstrom, the Legio Crucius, known colloquially as the Warmongers, the Star Phantoms as the most battle-ready chapter requested the honor of leading the first wave of assault. the Memento Mori shrugging off the gunfire of the Tyrant's fiefdom as 2 companies of Star Phantoms deployed to the Highguard orbital fortress. Their attack was supported by the Sons of Medusa and Firehawks, as a second wave of assault would be committed by the Carcharodons. The Star Phantoms committing the remaining 7 companies of their chapter to establish the simultaneous third assault. All other unassigned Loyalist chapters would aid such a push, with Inquisitorial Stormtrooper cadres in tow. The siege of the Palace of Thorns had begun, volleys of orbital bombardment tearing down its facade as Space Marines hurled themselves into its ruined carcass. The guns of the Memento Mori and Carcharodon's relic flagship, Nicor, unleashing plasma and cannon fire upon the Tyrant's kingdom of Hive Dominar. Thunderhawks descended from the skies, spilling forth Ceramite Seraphs in droves. The first hours of combat culling untold numbers of the Tyrant's legion as the Carcharodons tore through their defenses. 500 Star Phantoms overwhelmed the defenses of the Palace of Thorns, their brutal close-quarters engagements against the Astral Claws stalling their advance as even the guns of the Legio Crucius failed to breach the citadel. As night fell, thick clouds of smoke billowed high from the devastation-racking Hive Dominar. Reports of Luft Huron sightings said to place him in myriad defensive positions, personally overseeing siege efforts on numerous fronts. The Carcharodons taking the initiative during the second day of fighting. With sanction from Karab Khan, the eerie warriors of the Outer Dark sabotaged Hive Dominar's atomic and geothermal reactors, starving the planet of its power needs, disabling gun batteries, spiking power outages, and causing the surface to undergo earthquakes. Withdrawing from the battle with their act of destabilization complete, while the Carcharodons marveled at their deeds from orbit, the Star Phantoms pressed the advantage. Breaching the Palace of Thorns bunker network, these repurposed catacombs proved a fitting battleground for such grim Astartes, as Captain Zukral Androcles led his men into the heart of the citadel. Badab Primaris was dying, yet the Star Phantoms would not withdraw with their grim work unfinished, disabling the Palace of Thorns' protective lightning shield, forcing Luft Huron and his remaining honor guard to retreat to their escape craft. Captain Androcles, dueling Huron in single combat, committed to sell his and his men's lives should they slay the tyrant. Though Luft delivered a fatal blow, casting Androcles to the ground, his arrogance would be his downfall. Standing over his enemy's body to revel in his superiority, Captain Androcles rolled over, pointing his combine melter at the tyrant's head, discharging a subatomic blast of thermal energy at point-blank range. Destroying the tyrant's lightning claw, devastating his arm, as well as melting much of his face, the Astral Claws dragged the burning body of their master from the fray as Star Phantom's reinforcement hurried to tend to their captain. The tyrant of Badab had been deposed, yet Badab Primaris continued to convulse and spasm, tectonic shocks and volcanic eruptions, forcing the Loyalists to withdraw, having achieved their objective.
Can it be true? Can the tyrant of Badab yet live, at least in some form by some foul agency? I have seen too many miracles, both wondrous and nightmarish, to claim it cannot be so. Are we, mankind, then doomed to be always the father of our own torment, the genesis of our own destruction, time and again? God Emperor help us. Ever has it been so.
After 13 years of unrest, the Maelstrom Zone was finally freed of the tyrant's grasp. Hundreds of Astartes from the collective ranks of 18 chapters having given their lives in the name of the Emperor, with untold mortal soldiers likewise sacrifice. Imperial officials convening a trial known as the Consistorial Court to decide the fate of the surviving secessionists. Testimonies of heroes of the campaign, such as Karab Khan, Captain Mirsan, and Stibal Azarek, calling into question the true allegiances of those involved. Unanimously branding the Astral Claws as traitors to the Imperium, those captured from the Maelstrom Zone were summarily executed for their crimes. The Lamentus and Mantis Warriors chapters ordered to conduct a 100-year-long penitent crusade to absolve themselves of sin. Yet the Executioners chapter would not suffer the same fate. Granted some clemency thanks to the testimony of Captain Mirsan, the Salamanders would safeguard their twin chapter worlds until their own century of penance was complete. The Star Phantoms awarded dominion of the Badab sector for their valiant sacrifices made during the final assault of the Palace of Thorns. The Carcharodons, meanwhile, harvested tithes of new recruits from the Mantis Warriors fiefdom of the Endymion cluster, before once more embarking to the dark corners of the Void. Legate Inquisitor Jarndis Frayne enacting an edict of obliteration to eradicate all traces of the Astral Claw and Tiger Claw's presence wherever found, Their histories and glories would be redacted from imperial record, now disgraced in the eyes of the Emperor. Yet within the heart of the Maelstrom, the tyrant of Badab still drew breath, and from his malice, bitterness, and arrogance, a new blight upon the stars would be born. For tales of the Black Heart still torment the Imperium to this day, the vengeance of the Red Corsairs pillaging the Emperor's domains for over a century as the armada of the Pirate King continues to swell. Terror. Those of us given the onerous and dire responsibility of an Inquisitor in the service of the God Emperor of mankind flatter ourselves that we understand terror. We face it daily, both in the nightmarish enemies we must confront, and in the weight of the knowledge that hangs heavy on our hearts. We use it to our own just ends, shaping it in the minds of others as a potter might shape clay. But in our familiarity with terror, we can lose sight of its universal truth, that it is perhaps above all the greatest constant in human experience, perhaps in the experience of all that lives. Savage, warlike, and murderous things stalk the stars of our uncaring cosmos, and mankind is one of them. We are terror incarnate to the alien and the mutant, and the greatest fears of our enemies are reserved for that great and pure distillation of human wrath, the Space Marines. How great, then, is the tragedy and dread when we must turn them on our own. This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. The tale of the Badab War is that of a man whose ego outstripped his ability, a madman so entitled to glory that his insane quest to sunder the perils of the void himself blinded him of his own weaknesses. In your own life, you shall achieve great things, yet you must be mindful not to believe yourself infallible. For many a downfall has been presaged by the idea that it is impossible to fail to achieve one's own ambitions. So stay measured, pursue great things, and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Yet always be wary for signs of narcissism, lest you similarly deceive yourself of your own capabilities.